Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source, a place to meet some new friends, have some great conversations, and maybe learn something on the way. I'm your host, Isaac Levin. If you're enjoying the conversations here, be sure to like, subscribe, follow wherever you're watching or listening. Also, if you or someone you know would like to come on the show and have a conversation with me, be sure to reach out to me on Twitter. My handle there is IsaacR11, or you can reach out to me on Mastodon. My handle there is IsaacR11 at fossilnon.org. All right, so I'm looking forward to this one. My coffee is almost empty, but I'm all excited. My guest today is a podcast extraordinaire, also just general awesome person in the tech space, is Jamie Taylor. Jamie, do you want to say hello? Introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Isaac. Thank you ever so much for such a wonderful intro. I'm a long time listener, first time caller, so
Oh,
this
very
is a
good.
real privilege for me, I have to say.
Yeah, I mean it's
So
always
yeah.
yeah, it's always funny when you run into people like I for what it's worth, I've been on Jamie's show. We'll talk about, that podcast and how
Mhm.
awesome it is eventually in this conversation. But it's always fun getting to talk with people that every time you see them, you have like a really long conversation and you're like, "Man, this should probably be on some recording of some sort." So I'm hoping we can do some more of that. But anyway, do you want to maybe let our folks know who already don't follow you, like who you are and what you get into?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a software developer from the UK, that really small island over that used to be part of Europe, but we don't talk about that anymore. I'm one of those MVPs that people warn you about. And like Isaac so kindly said, I'm a bit of a podcaster as well. So I've got a number of different ones. A couple of them are on indefinite hiatus, but the main one is the .NET. Well, it used to be called the .NET Core podcast, but now it's the Modern .NET Show because for reasons. And then there's one that I do with my brother about video games. And there's one that is related to something that you said, Isaac, about meeting up with people and saying, this is a great conversation, this should be recorded. That's kind of how tabs and spaces started. And that's on indefinite hiatus at the moment, but we're hoping to bring that one back in the future sometime. Oh, I think perhaps you're muted, or maybe my.
Nah, it was me. So for what
Oh,
it's worth, tabs and
okay.
spaces, great name for a podcast. I don't know if you do this. Like I do this thing where I'll hear something that just feels very good in the mouth, and I'll say to my wife, like, "That's a great band name." Like,
Hmm.
like I we do this all the time, and she just thinks it's so corny. I think what's also very interesting is, you know, I love to talk with people. Like to go back to the having people on and just ranting. Like I love how people get started in tech. And I'd
Hmm.
imagine, like, I know you to an extent, right? But I don't know, like, all of your history. I would love to kind of hear your when did tech say, hey, Jamie, join us. Like, when was that?
Oh my goodness. So mine goes all the way back to like the mid 90s. So strap in, everyone. We're on for a long ride. I was about 6 or 7 years old, and my dad came home from work once, and he was a mechanical engineer. He came home from work once with this like a carrier bag, like a plastic bag, just full of things, and there's cables hanging out of it everywhere. And he's like, "Put that together, son." And I'm like, "Well, what's this?" So I
Sure, sure, sure.
start taking things out of this bag, and there's this keyboard with like a cassette tape player inside of it. And for the non-ibuprofen takers in the audience, that's how we used to listen to music before CDs. But yeah, so there's this keyboard with a cassette tape deck in it, and you have to plug that into a TV, and you have to run a bunch of cables between that and some other stuff, and you switch it on, and it says, what did it say? Amstrad Basic, and there's
Okay,
this
okay.
flashing cursor. Yeah, yeah. So what it was an Amstrad CPC 464, which is Amstrad is the company name that Alan Sugar runs, so Alan M. Sugar Trading.
Hmm.
He decided, hey, this Commodore 64 looks pretty good. Let's make our own. So he got a bunch of electrical engineers to build a computer, and this thing boots and it goes straight into BASIC. So I'm like, well,
Yeah,
there's this little book. It says 10 print, and then these characters. So I type it in, and it says hello, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I just made the thing do the thing,
sure.
and that was it. From that moment on, I knew what I wanted to do when I grew up.
Yeah, so let me just kind of, give you my thoughts on that. I think that there's some interesting things, especially like the wonder of seeing, like, then the immediate curiosity of, like, how does this work? Like, what do I do
Hmm.
with this thing? Like, what is potentially possible? Were you before that? Were you kind of like a tinkerer? Like, you like to understand how things work? Like, my go-to story is like I used to like put remote control cars on like dinosaurs, and I took apart the VCR, and when I got a computer, I took apart the computer. Like, were you of a similar like I need to know how this works sort of person, or was it really the computer that really sparked all of that interest?
So I think it was maybe six of one and half a dozen of the other because
Sure.
I have this very, very vivid memory of around the same time being given a rotary telephone and a screwdriver. And I took that thing to pieces.
Sure,
And I
sure.
was like, oh, cool, what's this? And how does this work? And oh, there's this cable here. And why is this cable all, because the cable from the handset to the I guess the base unit was like spiraled. And I'm
Okay.
like, why is that spiraled? And like trying to figure out why it's in a spiral and then being told later it's so that it's more difficult to tangle up and things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it just like, what's this? How does this work? What's that? How does that work? What happens if I do this and this and plug them together and like, oh no,
S-
I broke something.
So here's the $1 million question. Was that rotary phone, was it ever functional again after you took it apart?
Oh, it was never going to be functional again.
Sure. Okay.
Never.
Okay. Okay. So I just laugh at the people that that I think the interest wears off once they see all the bits, and they're like,
Right.
I remember this story. Like, as most teens or young adults, like building computers was kind of a thing. Like I came to age when like building a home PC was like something that was kind of accessible. Like, not as crazy as
Hmm.
it is now, where you got to worry about water cooling and overclocking and all this stuff, but like, you buy all the parts, you can put them all together. So like my friends and I, we all like built computers, and I remember like we're building a computer, and it didn't turn on. And one of my friends' dad worked in IT, so like I remember we ran to his house carrying like that giant like 30-pound thing, and he was like, "Your CMOS is not set." And like something as simple as that, right? It's like we don't know what that is. We just plug all the bits
Yeah.
together, right? And then if it posts, cool. If it doesn't post, oh man, somebody needs to help me. Um, yeah, no, like, has your interest in how things work, does it go outside of computing and technology? Like, do you enjoy cars, or other things that it's like, okay, show me how this thing works? Has it kind of has your interest evolved into those other areas, or is it very much still in like the technology computing space?
So, I'm not so much into cars, but I have a bunch of bass guitars that I
Oh, sure.
occasionally will
Yeah.
like. How do I take this to pieces? How do I move this? How do I change that? So that kind of just the tinkery, like, oh, cool, this is how a pickup works, and this is how the string, when the strings vibrate over and that
Yep.
the magnetized and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, and for a while, and we can get into this if you want, but for a while I worked as a math teacher,
Mm.
and I worked to try and build like relationships between the different departments of the school because maths is quite boring, right? Well, okay, no, that's unfair.
Some of
To
math
some
boring.
people, yeah,
Some of
yeah,
it is quite fun. I think that there's something very enjoyable about fast calculation in math.
hmm,
Like I very much get off on like, oh, like I see things and I'm like, oh, that costs this, this, and this. Like, or my kid and I
hmm,
will do like the Fahrenheit to Celsius conversion because that's fun, right? Like, that sort of math is
hmm,
fun. But I think, at least for me, my math topped out at like limits and infinite series, where the
right.
math got so um impractical for my brain that I gave up like the interest in math. But I interrupt you, like, keep going, like you're trying to connect all these different departments
Yeah.
together.
Yeah, no, that's perfectly fine. I mean, this is just that's how a conversation works, right?
Yep.
But so yeah, yeah, I tried to build all these different connections between the different departments, and the one department that was really receptive to it was music,
Mm,
and we sat there and built this big poster and did all this stuff about the keys on the music. Maths and physics are essentially the same
yes.
thing, right?
Yeah.
Um, and like the keys on the keyboard, middle C is 440 hertz. What's 440 hertz? Well, what's hertz? That's a frequency. What's 440? Well, that's divisible by two and multiplied by this, that, and the other, and all this kind of stuff. And then that ended up we formed a school band with some of the teachers, and we called ourselves the Excluded. But one of the
Mm,
things that I did was I started learning how to be a music tech, like taking the instruments to pieces and cleaning them out and putting them back together and checking, all the circuit diagrams and stuff. So yeah, that has always been a huge like an interest to me. Like how do we go from like a resistor and a capacitor essentially
sure.
into the transistor into like Daft Punk? How do we make those steps? Like, I
Yeah.
don't understand the steps, and
Yeah.
I want to know all the steps, right?
I like how you go from like the simple, I guess, simple circuitry components to Daft Punk, because it's like the complete um, exploitation of how electricity works, right? Like it,
Hmm.
you think about. I use this. I use the metaphor all the time. Like we're just convincing sand to be intelligent, right? Like I use that a
Absolutely.
lot, right? And it's always fascinating to me, like when you see how technology and electricity like have transformed art. I think that's something that's always very interesting to
Hmm.
me. Like not just like in music, but in film and television, and even like more, I guess, traditional forms of art, right? Like you go to modern art museums, you see installations that have some electricity or some computing as a part of them, and you're like, oh, this goes to my belief that like technology is a form of art in and of itself. Like I know that that's not a
Hmm.
hot take anymore, but there was a point in time where, oh, if you're in computers, like you're very left brain oriented. Like you like science and math, and you're kind of you don't have aesthetics, or you don't like art or whatever. And my response to that is
Hmm.
always like, just talk to anybody in tech. Like they all either play an instrument, they all either have, they draw, they are very good with like art in the like in like the digital space, like with Photoshop or whatever. And try telling me that's not artistic. Also, just in general, like solving problems with technology is art in and of itself. um, to the extent where you look at code and you're like, oh, that code is terrible. And it's like
Hmm.
you have a subjective view, as somebody who might have a subjective view of art. You go look at a piece of art on the wall, you're like, that is ugly, right? Which I think is
Yeah.
pretty fascinating. But like the music thing to me has always been interesting. Like as folks know, if you have ever seen the show, like the video part, like I have guitars behind me. I like the first guitar that I ever owned, I built myself. Like this guitar,
Oh,
yeah,
nice.
this guitar right here, it's a Eric Clapton replica. I very much appreciate Eric Clapton's music. Eric Clapton as a person, not so much, but Eric Clapton's music, spot on. And I wanted that to be able to like have the guitar, but Fender, like the guitar is like $5,000 or whatever. So I was like, how much could it actually cost if I just built it myself? And
Yeah.
I looked up all the parts, I looked up all the specs of everything, and I was like, oh, I can build an Eric Clapton guitar for like $400. So I bought all the individual
Yeah.
components and I put them all together, and that's what this black and white thing is. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, like the music thing has always been very very interesting to me, and how I think that if you have like that interest in tech and how things work, you have a leg up on things. Like you said, the math thing, right? Like once you
Hmm.
realize that music is just math, like, and to an extent physics, like it makes it far more easier to comprehend.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And like knowing the intervals between the keys and all that kind of stuff, you can instead of having to learn the names of the notes, you could, I'm not suggesting people do, but you could learn the patterns between like the intervals of the keys on the keyboard or whatever, right? So you can go 440 and then down to 425 and up to this, that, and the other. And then you can write music with math, which is, I guess, where math rock comes from, right? It's like, and how the crazy thing is like how we respond to it,
Yeah.
not just from like an aesthetic point of view, but like if you play some fast music in a room full of people, their hearts will beat faster. If you play slow music, their hearts will beat slower, right?
Yeah.
We have a physical reaction to it. It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, what's always been fascinating to me is the people. I had to Google it really quick, but like synesthesia. Have you ever heard that? Have you heard of
Yeah.
that? Yeah, right. Where you see music as colors, right? That's always
Hmm.
been so fascinating to me. It's like, and there was an artist that I saw on TikTok where she'll listen to a song and then she'll paint the representation of that song, like they're just these beautiful
Right.
paintings of like just these really abstract things. And she's like, when I listen to this song, this is what it looks like to me. And it's like, and
Right.
being able to like that to me is just like absolutely mind-boggling, like how some people's brains work, right? It's quite fascinating, like that connection too between, because that's just a chemistry thing. For whatever reason, that person's brain
Mm.
chemistry is very much like they equate like the whole spectrum of color to the whole spectrum of sound, which
Hmm.
is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love stuff like that. Like, is it is it pareidolia where you can see shapes of things in ordinary? So
Yes.
like you can get like like a faucet, and it's like, oh, it's a face or
Yeah,
something
yeah,
like
yeah.
that, right? That and what's the other one I really like? Oh, I've forgotten it now. We'll have to come back to it.
Sure,
But
sure.
there's all sorts of really cool things like that that I just love, where it's like, wow, because it's just the way that everybody's made slightly differently, and that's what makes everyone unique. It's
Yeah.
fantastic. Oh, that's the other thing. It's the inner monologue.
Oh,
Some
yeah,
people
yeah.
don't have an inner voice. Like I have an inner voice. If I'm thinking of something, I hear a voice like speaking my thoughts,
Yep.
but some people don't have that, and that's just fascinating to me. It's neither a good thing nor a bad thing. Just just we're all made completely differently. It's fantastic.
Oh, I remember having this conversation with somebody, and so I have ADHD and I take medication for it, and I was talking to this person, and they said something, and I was like, "Well, it's really not how my brain works. I really can't work like that." And they were like, "What do you mean that's not how your brain works?" And I kind of explained to them like how my brain goes about doing a particular thing, and this person looked at me like point blank and said, I can't even imagine what that's like. Right.
Mhm.
So it's like, yeah, like this, the spiciness of all of us, like it kind of helps it helps shape who we are and gives us a leg up in some regards. And, and it's an extra step in other places too.
Mhm.
One of the things that I would love to, starting off, you were always curious, right? You're like, you like
Mhm.
tech, you like this idea. When did you realize that there's money to be made in computers? Like, was that pretty later on? Did it like maybe in uni or maybe after uni where you're like, oh yeah, like this computer thing, like there, I can take my interest in my hobby and like have a career out of it.
So I think so the around the time that we got this computer, we also had like an NES, right? So that
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
puts you in roughly the time when it happened. And I always knew like video games were always around me as a kid, right? We had all the different consoles, playing loads of different games, and I was like, well, okay, cool. These are great. This is a fantastic piece of equipment, fantastic piece of enjoyment. And then 007 GoldenEye came out, and
yeah,
it like created the industry. The video game industry existed before then, but 007 GoldenEye and the Nintendo 64 over like almost overnight made video games way more profitable than films. And you have to remember that 007 GoldenEye came out like 2 years after the movie had stopped being in the
yeah.
theaters, right? And just overnight, it just became this huge success. And it was at that point that I was like, huh, they're making loads of money doing this. And I like to do kind of noodling around on the computer. Maybe I can do noodling around on the computer for a job. And then at the high school I was going to, I always, I've, we can come back to this one thought if you like, but like they had this group and it was the gifted and talented. And I feel
Mm,
really bad because I feel like it's, from my perspective, what I saw was the school put all of their effort into like 12 students. And I was one of those 12 students, and everybody else got left behind, which is nice for me, but unfair for the rest of the students. But
sure.
then would it have been better not to have that? I don't know. I can never say. Anyway, they had this program and they took us to the local university for an afternoon. And we got a tour around the computer science department. And I was like, whoa, actually, there's other people who do this.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
like you can learn to do this. This is awesome. And they had a bunch of like video game hardware development kits, and there was this like final year student just hacking away on this computer. They hit a button and their game started on the PlayStation, and I was like, "What? Wait, how? No, okay, I've got to work out how you do this."
Isn't it funny how once you find, and this is probably not the best way to phrase it, like once you find like your people or like the people
Mhm.
that all share the same interests as you, like you immediately are like, you have this epiphany of like, I'm not alone, but also like, why did
Mhm.
it take me so long to find these people? Right. And
Yeah,
like, I had that
yeah.
similar experience, right? Like, you go into a computer lab, in college or in high school or whatever, and you just like, oh, most of the people here are like me, when you grow up, like you live in a in a society where it's like a kind of a hodgepodge of all those different kinds of people. But once you get to like a you fall into a specialized area, you're like, oh, everybody here loves like your GoldenEye example, right? Like
Hmm.
I remember vividly like GoldenEye just completely just taking over lives of people until to this day. Like there's still
Hmm.
GoldenEye tournaments. Like I can't
Yep.
imagine a game that will ever have as much impact on the industry at large than GoldenEye. And that's what that like
Hmm.
really crummy 64 controller, right? Like
Yep.
this like it's to this day it's just terrible. But for whatever reason, GoldenEye with the with that controller works just very well. Which
Hmm.
it's pretty brilliant to think about.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think
Yeah. It's
yeah, go ahead.
sorry. Oh, I was just gonna say that like that and like the I feel like you and I being from a similar of a similar vintage,
Sure.
shall
Yeah,
we
yeah,
say.
yeah.
We saw a bunch of technological leaps that I feel like may not happen again, similar to what you were saying about GoldenEye. Just no
Yeah.
one will ever see an explosion like that. Like if you look at, so I'm huge about video games. So if you look at like the very first Metal Gear Solid game, 1998,
Mm-hmm.
1999, and Metal Gear Solid 2, like 4 years later, the difference in
Yeah.
the graphical fidelity and what they were able to do with the consoles is just astounding. And like going from one to the other, that is a massive leap.
Sure.
And I feel like we're at the point where I'm not trying to downplay the effort that the console designers or the
Sure.
developers or the designers or anybody else puts into it, but like from a if you look at it from a consumer point of view, it's incremental changes.
Yep.
It's like, oh, we've made it just a little bit better, just a little bit better, a little bit better.
Yeah, you're a bit more politically correct than I am. Like I think there was a thread on there's a thread on Twitter probably a few months ago now about it was about like the new Call of Duty or something. And
Hmm.
like I went on this mini tirade. It's like Call of Duty's been shipping just skin updates for the last 10 years, right?
Hmm.
Like and people just buy it because whatever. But like tell me
Hmm.
where the innovation, like that's a bad choice of words, but my point is made in that regard, right? Like where's the innovation been in some of these video game segments? There are some games like I'm very fortunate because I live in the Seattle area and there's the Museum of Pop Culture here, which has a video game exhibit where you can go and see like indie games that are being built by people, and they're
Hmm.
games of all different kinds of varieties, and they're interesting. But I think to your
Hmm.
point, like a lot of the mass-produced huge studio games, it's a combination of microtransactions. It's a combination of very incremental changes. And basically it's
Hmm.
just, okay, how can we bleed our existing audience for more money, not get new audience?
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
I think is very unfortunate because I think to your point, there is so much that you can do in this space. Like the canvas
Hmm.
is completely blank. And if we just see the keep on the same rehashing of first person shooter, role playing game, MMORPG, like you see like the same trends over and over and over again. And it's like, you mean to tell me there's no more stories to tell in the video game space? I disagree.
Hmm.
I think it's just laziness. And that's my politically
Yeah.
incorrect statement. It's like it's just laziness by a lot of these studios. But anyway,
No, no, I feel like I completely agree. Obviously, there are. We're not even talking about open source, but this is cool.
sure.
The you know, when you have a business, you are ultimately, you're responsible to the shareholders. So you've got to do the thing that makes the money. And so I totally appreciate why most of the big companies can't make the experimentation stuff that they want to make. Totally get that. But yeah, to your point about Mopop, I absolutely love the Museum of Popular Culture. I've been there like 3 or 4 times now,
Yeah.
and it's a fantastic.
It's
Absolutely.
yeah, it scratches like I mean, for people that don't live in Seattle, and if you ever get an opportunity to go to Seattle and you have any sort of affinity to nerd culture or music culture,
Hmm.
it is very much like
Hmm.
it scratches itches. There's like, there's a sci-fi area, there's a high fantasy area, there's a horror area, there's obviously all this musical stuff because originally it was the Jimi Hendrix Museum, who was a famous guitar player. Um, but yeah, it's I think for one, like we'll just talk about like we're not talking about open source yet. I warned you on the show. I warned you before we got started. Like
Yeah.
sometimes we talk about open source, sometimes we just talk about just random stuff like video games, which I think is cool. I think
Hmm.
one thing that's pretty interesting about what you're saying about taking like companies taking like a big experimental swing. I was listening to a podcast interview with Sebastian Stan today, who, for folks who don't know, plays Bucky Barnes in like the Marvel universe, right?
Hmm.
And he was talking about how like Marvel movies have given him the opportunity to take risks in other movies, like because like you know if he was trying to be an actor and he was taking movies, he wouldn't be able to be as comfortable taking like an independent movie that's lower budget or whatever because he can't get paid, but Marvel pays, right?
Hmm.
So I think it's one of those things where I do think that we some of these companies do need to recognize, okay, and not to knock on Activision again, but Call of Duty makes a lot of money. So
Hmm.
maybe we should take some of that money and just maybe we'll create a whole new genre of game that will be the next, I don't know, whatever, Zelda or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like, but I think that to your point, companies are very risk averse. So
Hmm.
if it's not going to guarantee increasing shareholder wealth, why do it?
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I guess that's why you end up with things like the Nintendo Wii and the Meta Quest and things like that, right? There are companies who are trying things and they're willing to try these things, but then, the Nintendo Wii comes out with its motion controllers, and then suddenly, wait, the Xbox now has a camera that does motion controllers. Then suddenly the PlayStation has these motion controllers, and then it's all built into the controller itself, right? So it's like it does innovate. It just like it takes time, I
Yeah.
guess, for it to
I think
sort of
all
filter through.
I think also like there's a lot of just anxiety around being first to market, right? Even
Hmm.
though like the goal is always to be first to market, right? It's like, oh, we
Hmm.
want to be able to innovate in a way that we're going to drive the conversation. But in a lot of regards, like a lot of companies are just fine being copycats, right? Where it's
Hmm.
like, oh, we're going to be second to
Yeah.
market in this space because we're not going to take the huge R&D risk, and also like we're going to see what works and doesn't work, and maybe we'll be able to grab enough market share to make some money off of this thing. Which I mean, as somebody who wants to see new and exciting things all the time, especially in my space, like in tech,
Hmm.
like it makes me kind of sad a little bit that a lot of companies are
Yeah.
like, oh, we're just gonna do like a rehashing of the same way we build apps or a rehashing of the same way we store data or whatever.
Hmm.
Not to say that like the industry might not need new solutions in some places, but if some companies aren't trying, it's kind of sad, right?
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think, and I may be wrong, but I think you're referring to something that's from game theory, which is like if I have two companies, I don't know why that's happened. Oh, it's because I'm on my Mac, right? So I got two companies, right?
Yep,
I've got company A and company B, right? It's happened again. I'm gonna hold up like I don't know. I'll hold
that's
up my,
so
my
funny.
plectrums, right?
For
So we've got. Sorry,
no,
you
it's
go
good.
ahead.
No. I mean, I have nothing to say other than that was pretty funny. But anyway, for
Yeah,
the people that are just listening, like Jamie's background, and I don't know, he's getting interesting filters put through his camera, which is a cool feature. Also, not sure if that works like if you're on a business meeting. But anyway, moving on.
Yeah, I've been on so many client calls and so it's like the gestures system
I see.
for people who are listening in, and you can do certain gestures like a thumbs up and it will draw a thumbs up. I've never figured out how to disable it, but I've been on calls before where I've done something like that, like I've waved my hands around and then there's like fireworks exploding behind me, and I'm like, please disregard the fireworks. I assure
I
you,
don't want to go on I
Senator,
don't
I
want to go
am
on
not a
I
cat.
don't want to go on a tangent because you had something that you were going, but like there was
Hmm.
somebody's job to build that. There was also somebody's
Hmm.
job to like be a PM on that. There was a job to somebody to test that. And like the fact that you're like it's a cool feature but like not sure why I have it and how I turn it off. Like it's just very funny. Anyway,
Yeah.
hopefully you remember where you were going cuz this is a little rant, but let's so you
Yeah.
had two picks up, right?
Yeah, yeah. So say I have two companies. I'll try and hold them. kind of vaguely where folks will see them in the video. So I'm just holding up two objects. It's guitar picks, but whatever. We got company A and company B, and there is some new innovation that can happen in the space. Company A will watch company B, and company B will watch company A, because there's this worry of, like you were saying, if I spend all of my money on research and development and it's a flop, then that gives my competitor the leg up to,
Yeah.
like, it tells them not to go in that direction. But then if I wait for them to do it, they could make millions of dollars doing it. So you end in this like dilemma. I don't think it's actual game theory, but I think it's part of it, where you're like, well, do I innovate or don't I?
Yeah.
And a lot of my feeling is there are a lot of big companies don't innovate specifically just because if we try it and we fail, that's the reputation and that's the money lost and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I have a kind of a transition because you already gave me a hard time for us not talking about open source, but we can talk about open source exactly in this regard. I think a lot of companies
Yeah.
expect the industry. What I mean by industry is I mean independent developers or smaller companies or what have you to drive that innovation for whatever reason. And then
Hmm.
big company will like, "Oh, that idea worked. Let me just do that." And then you have this a
Hmm.
lot, like especially like in our world in .NET, like you see this a lot where it's like, oh, like cool, like third party package or third party tool comes out, and then eventually like big tech company, not saying which big tech company it is because there's a few of them, um, will come in and say, oh, that's a brilliant idea, we're gonna build that, and then
Yeah.
the community is like, why are you building thing that already exists in our ecosystem? And then big
Hmm.
company is like, because why not? And it's very very
Yeah.
interesting like this balance, right? Because I think like going back to like the risk aversion thing, we definitely have like this, we don't want to take the risk, but we will definitely take the reward.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I equate that to, it's not specifically what you were talking about, but when I look at identity server in the
Yeah,
.NET space,
sure.
so for folks who are not .NET devs, that was a way of doing authentication and authorization in .NET Framework and now in the modern .NET stuff in ASP.NET Core. And you would just basically pull down a package, it would make some changes to your database to add a bunch of tables, and almost voila, you have login, log out feature and authentication and refresh tokens and all this kind of
Sure.
stuff effectively for free. But what happened with the identity server folks was they went, well, hang on, this is our niche and we've done this for 10 years or whatever. And rightly or wrongly, they gave it away for free, but they made almost no money with it.
Yeah.
And so they went, you know what? We'll draw a line in the sand. We'll stop development on this version because now .NET Core is a thing. Now it's now just called .NET, but at the time it was .NET Core is a thing. They founded a company and then started selling it as software that could be
Hmm.
sold.
Yep.
And there was lots of different reactions in the industry. And what I saw was, from my perspective, I'm like, well, of course, they have mortgages to pay, they have kids that they're raising, or maybe they don't have kids they're raising. They've got food to put in their bellies, they've got cars to drive, they've got life to live,
Yes.
right? And if we do everything for free, then who's going to pay us to do the free thing?
Yeah.
But then I saw from the community a lot of people saying, well, that means now that my default when I go file a new project doesn't have that baked in. I now have to go and bake it in myself, and I have to pay for it. And I'm like, well, of course you do. You're just about to go and make $1 million on your new project that you're making. Or if you're one of the bigger software development companies, you're going to make up $1 billion out of all of this free open source software and just throw it all together and then say, wait, hang on, we have to pay somebody now? That's not fair. And
Yeah.
I feel like that's one of my spiciest takes
Yeah. This is
about the .NET
yeah, this
ecosystem.
is uncovering just so for what it's worth, if folks want to have like a longer like hear a longer version of a conversation we're about to have, I have had James Jackson South on this show. So James is
Nice.
he's the founder of a very very popular, well-known uh uh like .NET extension suite of things for like manipulating images called Six Labors. Like Image Sharp is what the thing that probably most people know. We talk a lot about his decision around going from, hey, like this is free, like free beers and free coffee, to like I need to, like I've invested so much of my time and energy, like I should be recuperated in some regard, right? So we're
Hmm.
like please check out that show from, I think it's like last year sometime. But anyway, you bring up an interesting point. It's like the community is very filled in this particular area of open source, right? Where it's like we want the free thing, we want the developers to be in a place where they can continue to build the free thing, but sometimes that might include having a paid thing as well. But heaven
Mhm.
forbid you try to make money off of something that a version of it is free. And this is like,
Mhm.
in my opinion, this isn't the best way to phrase this. This is a huge problem in open source. Is that the entitlement of the typical open source user, not developer, open source
Mhm.
user, the person who uses and consumes open source work. They're very entitled to the idea that it's like I should just be able to NuGet package download, npm install, whatever, 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 and
Mhm.
it should be free, and I should have free support, and screw you for trying to turn it into capitalism. And
Yeah.
it's disappointing because we're all human beings. We all have a life to live. But to think that like the thing that you want is more important than like the person that is building the thing that you are just freely using is just absolutely insane to
Mhm.
me. Anyway, I'll stop.
Yeah.
I would love to get your thoughts.
Oh no, I completely agree. Like everyone who's working open source and producing, even if it's not used by anyone, right? You're still exchanging your time and labor for something, right? And so I feel like everyone should be able to put something out there. So one of the I've just had like a competing thought, but yeah, I'll say it now. Is that like some of my projects are source available rather than open source,
Yes.
and that is just like I'm putting it on GitHub or wherever, but I'm not going to take pull requests. I'm not going to do it. It is there. Use it if you want. And some of them are cool. I'm actively developing this. I'm working on this.
Yep.
If you want to contribute, that's awesome. We are recording this in October, so it's Hacktoberfest. Some of
Sure.
those projects can be looked at, but the other ones are very much a case of I'm just putting this out there and I don't care, right? It exists and it shall exist like this until I feel the need to do something to it, and that's just me saying I have this much personal bandwidth, whatever this much means, and I am devoting some of it to
Yeah.
this open source thing and some of it to this source available thing. And if it gets upgraded and updated, then fantastic. If it doesn't, then also fantastic, right? And I feel like you were saying, a lot of people, or rather I've inferred from what you were saying, a lot of people kind of tend to forget that the other end of the .NET install package or npm install, the other side of that, there is a human or a team of humans
Yeah.
who are spending time in their evenings when they could be spending time with friends or family, or could be spending time just winding down with a book or watching TV or whatever. They are choosing to do this thing. And I feel like there's sometimes a disconnect there. And I don't, I am not smart enough to figure out how do we support these folks correctly
Sure.
and stuff. But things like GitHub sponsorships, Patreon, and Buy Me a Coffee are fantastic. So what I would urge people to do is that, hey, if you're using an open source package for something and you can find it and there is a support me by buying me a coffee, it's like $4,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You can go without one extra coffee, I am sure, right? Just
Yeah.
send them a coffee because it's less about actually receiving the money and more like it's a form of gratitude. Hey, this person really appreciates what I've done, right?
Yeah. No, no. I plus one to everything. Like I think one thing that's also really important to just mention as well as a part of that is that you know there's kind of when I think of open source, obviously the licensing part is very interesting. It's like what you can and cannot use, right? I think that a lot of developers just look past the whole licensing thing and they're like, it's on GitHub, I'm going to use it. I'm going to treat it like it's a thing. And
Yeah.
also, like, I think a lot of people don't even acknowledge like who's the person who's the person building the thing they're consuming. Sometimes, like you said, it might be big company has open source this thing. Like in regards to that, if they're gonna give it to you for free, like you should probably like treat it like it's a product made by them. if it's a big company.
Mm-hmm.
If it's, you look and it's like, one singular contributor and it's like a funny name and it's like obviously somebody who does it in their spare time, have some empathy. And,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm seeing this a lot too, and this is kind of a weird transition, but like a lot of companies or not a lot of people have started to go down this path of like they'll just like to your point, they'll just throw code out there and they're like, this isn't supported, you can use it, but like they don't even have an issues tab in GitHub. They
Mm-hmm.
don't have a discussions tab in GitHub. It's just like this is code. Like cool,
Mm-hmm.
like don't contact me if you have issues, right? Um, I've like thoughts about that. I think that it's a healthy thing to do as somebody who writes code that wants to just share an idea. Um, but I will also say as somebody that at times like will try to figure out why something isn't working the exact way I expect it to work, and I just need some help. That help is very
Mm-hmm.
valuable, but also I recognize that like I shouldn't get like tier 1 24/7 support, right?
Of
So
course. Yeah.
yeah, it is like this whole space to me is very interesting because I think that we struggle a lot, and I've had this conversation 1,000 times on the show, but like it just seems to me like there's just some missing piece to the whole open source model that would make it substantially more equitable. And I
Mm.
don't know what it is. Yeah, I'm not smart enough to figure out what it is, but there has to be some mechanism because I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we're talking about like GitHub repo, random GitHub repo. Like we haven't even talked about like interdependencies of larger things, right? Like everybody here has heard the pad left story, right? Where a guy deleted an npm package and it literally broke Kubernetes or some large project. I don't remember exactly what project it was, but it's like it's turtles all the way down, and eventually you will get to a situation where it's one person at their desk doing a thing, even for a
Mm-hmm.
huge open source project.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. There's a reason that the XKCD comic that says something along the lines of it's like they've got like a tower of Jenga
Yep.
blocks, and there's this one thin block that they all stand on. There's an arrow pointing to it, and it says one open source package maintained by some guy in his basement in Nebraska,
Yep.
because that is literally how the internet works,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And everything's built on top of that. So you're absolutely right. Like, how do we support these two, maybe not even one, two developers? How do we support the packages that we all rely on? I hate to keep bringing it up, but I brought up XZ the other day. That compression package that was attacked earlier this year. That was part of a
Yeah.
multi-year building up confidence in the open source space and waiting for the developer to have a mental health problem before jumping in and actually taking control and putting things
Yeah.
in as a back door, right? Like if that can happen on a small package that, and I say small, I don't mean like
Yeah.
to diminutize it, but like if that can happen to that, and
Small
that
in
is in
size,
the,
not in value.
yeah,
Right. Yeah.
absolutely, yeah, and it's in the supply chain for a whole bunch of things, including Linux distributions and Postgres and things like that, right? If that can get attacked, that is essentially all of the software ever
Yeah.
that gets attacked, right? And you're right, it's these individual pieces of the Lego bricks that make up modern software, modern infrastructure that we need to look out for.
Yeah.
But how we do that, I don't
And
know.
it's funny because like so as Jamie mentioned, like we're recording this in October ish of 2024, right? And one of our listeners right now, S Prez, like just mentioned like the WordPress stuff, right? Like
Hmm.
so if you're not following along, like WordPress has some drama right now. Like I'm not gonna exhaust
Hmm.
what that drama is, but like it's related to something along this same path, right? And
Hmm.
it shows you that like no one is immune. No company, no framework, no like because I think of WordPress and I'm like, oh, like the thing that's been around for 20 years to build blogs. It's like, yeah, it's still
60% of the
yeah,
internet.
it's like still openly maintained. There's a company behind it, but right now there's lots of interesting things that are going on with the people that
Hmm.
built it versus the people that own it versus the people that contribute to it versus the people that use it from a technical standpoint, the people that extend it.
Hmm.
And like it's just one of those things where it doesn't matter what size you are, there is drama to be found. And,
Hmm. Yeah.
in another not very subtle transition, like I would like to talk about, like the area that we work in specifically, or the area that
Hmm.
we love very much, right? Um, so for folks that aren't .NET developers, both Jamie and I are I guess you want to say like .NET fans or people that appreciate .NET,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I would like to talk. I would like to kind of get not to like do the origin story thing again, but I would love to kind of get like when did you first find out about .NET? When did you realize it was a thing that you could use, and when did you kind of fall in love with it? Because I mean, it's safe to say I think you fall in love with .NET, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
I think so I got to give a shout out to a fellow MVP, Rob Miles. He was my the first computer science professor that I ever studied under. And his thing was, I'm going to teach you computer science with C Sharp and .NET. And this was like 2004, right?
sure.
And his lectures were legendary. He'd stand there at the front of the lecture theater with a laptop plugged into a projector, and he'd go into the command line, type in Notepad, and hit return. He wouldn't go into Start menu
Yeah,
and
yeah.
go to Notepad. He'd type up his program in Notepad, and then he'd bring up the command line, do CSC,
Yep.
which for anyone who used to be on older versions of Windows from XP onwards, the C Sharp compiler used to be part of one of the service packs, and you could just call it from the command line, say CSC, the path to your C Sharp project, C Sharp file, and it would create the binary right there and then. You didn't need Visual Studio or anything like that. You never have done. But I'm not trying to say people don't use Visual Studio.
Sure,
Use the
sure.
tools that make you happy. But like the point behind why he did that was because he was like, I'm not teaching you Visual Studio, I'm teaching you computer science.
Yes.
And it was in those lectures that I was like, hey, this is really because I'd done basic, I'd done a little bit of assembler for a couple of months at college. So in the UK we do high school, then college, then university, for the folks who are listening. And I'd done C and C++, and I was like, these are great. I can tell the computer what to do, but it's just not. There's something about it. It's just not gelling with me.
Yeah.
I get it, I can do it, but it's just there's something it just doesn't fit. And then, I wrote a couple of programs with C Sharp when I got to university and when I was doing these comp sci stuff, things like bubble sort and quick sort and things
Yep.
like that. And I'm like, this is actually really good. I really like this. So yeah, I would say around 2004 was when I sort of got interested in C Sharp and the .NET stuff, and I was like, yeah, this is it. This is me. This is where I am. And since then, like I've done Python and Go and Rust and the there's lots of different types of developers, but what I want to do is I want to learn as much as I can about all the different other languages, so then I can understand why they are different and why they are more relevant to other problems. And that way, when I come to a problem and I'm like, actually, this doesn't feel like a .NET problem, I can go, oh wait, this is a Rust problem, or this is a Go problem, or whatever, or this is more Python-y,
Sure.
because then I can then reach for that toolbox and then build something in that language or framework. But yeah, .NET it's my first programming love, I've got to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very similar. Like my entire professional career has been like it's like it .NET slash VB script slash ASP script. Like I've
Mhm,
I've I've learned Node and Python and along the way. But like if I'm going to like I have an idea for like a project, like the first thing that I'll think of is like does it make sense to do this in C sharp, right? That's just kind of how
mhm.
my brain works. And one of the things I would love to kind of chat with you, and especially because of the time that you're talking about, to like 2004, to now 20 years, you've kind of seen a large, segment of the history of .NET, right? Like I think .NET is like
Mhm,
22 years old or something like that, 23 years old, and as a part of that, there's been like this very like interesting progression from hey, like this solves a very particular problem for a very specific thing to okay, we're going to maybe make this available to people for free to okay, there's this
mhm,
great tooling built around it. Now we're going to make it available open source. Now we're going to make sure that it runs everywhere, so on, so on, so on, right?
mhm.
I'd love to get your just general high level opinion as to like how is .NET done from like a historical perspective becoming more and more accessible.
Right. So first thing I'll just say real quick because I feel like, and this isn't meant to throw a shade upon Microsoft or anyone else. I feel like the community doesn't make a big enough deal about the fact that .NET runs everywhere, and that
Yeah,
is it runs everywhere. It's open source and it's cross-platform. So if I'm sitting here talking to you using my Mac Air, Mac Air M2, right, and I can just do .NET New in the command line or bring up an IDE and go file new project, and I've got .NET running on my machine. There's no futzing around. There's no installing of Mono. There's no extra build tools. It's all the same tools. You just splat and it's there. And I feel like the messaging maybe has not been as clear, perhaps, shall we say, that hey, this runs literally everywhere,
sure.
and it literally does. If you have a specific brand of refrigerator, it will run on your
Yep,
refrigerator, right?
yep,
That's the crazy thing. But um, from my perspective, going from a Windows only, enterprise only thing through to I can build an app for my phone, um, or run it on a Raspberry Pi or run it in a data center somewhere. I think they've done or even in the browser, right? They've done a fantastic job of just doing all of the things. But one of the things that I've noticed from the community and from my clients specifically is my client base and the community is like the community still doesn't it's not loud, like I said, it's not like largely known in the community that it's open source cross platform and it's available for you to just download and get on with it. um, but I've also noticed that a lot of the clients that I work with, they're now starting to hedge their bets with .NET, and I don't mean that in a negative way. What I mean is that they're going, wait, there's a new version every year. There never used to be a new version every year. It used to be every 4 years.
yeah,
But what's great about that is what's great about the new versions every year is to your point there, it makes it immediately accessible. Like there's been a whole bunch of work done to reduce the toil and the craft and the ceremony around starting an app. Right?
mm-hmm.
It used to be that Hello World in C Sharp was 14 lines. It is now one line.
Yep,
Technically, it's two because one of them is a comment saying, "Hey, the rest of this code doesn't exist." So it's one line. It's just literally console.writeLine parentheses, and then in quotes, hello world, and a semicolon at the end. That's how you do set hello world in C Sharp in 2024. In 2004, when I started, we had to know what a namespace was, what a using statement was, what
yeah,
a class was, what public static void main was, what string array args was, and then you get to
yeah,
console.writeline, whereas like if you look at Python, you look at Node, it is one line, it's print line or it's console.log or whatever, which is fantastic. And that's where we should be going. Need to make it super easy for everyone to get started with whatever language clicks with them, right? Because no one should have to go through, I'm going to say pain, and it's in bunny quotes, but no one should have to go through the pain that I went through of learning what are these 13 other
yeah,
lines do,
yeah, yeah,
right? What are these squiggly brackets all about? What's that mean? I should just be able to go splat and get started, and I'm off, right? Because the thing with education is it's all about little wins, and the faster you can get to a win, the more likely someone is to learn something, right? If I if I'm trying to teach, I often go into schools and stuff and try to teach kids programming if they're interested. I'll pick a language that is like you do nothing, like it's already on the computer. You need no tools.
yeah,
So I'll go with JavaScript, right? Because you've got
sure,
a notepad and a browser. You're done. You have everything you need in order to learn programming. Rather than walking in and then talking to their ops people or their IT people and going, right, I need you to install Visual Studio on
mm-hmm,
25
mm-hmm,
machines. I
yep,
need you to install .NET, and I need you to blah, 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 blah for this half an hour session. That's no good.
yeah,
So I am all for .NET becoming more accessible, and they've done really well at that. But I feel like in doing so and in innovating so quickly, they're scaring off some of the big enterprise customers. At least from my
mm,
perspective, the customers that I deal with, because they're not used to .NET moving so quickly.
yes,
And you should be people should be thinking, well, do I need to install the new updates every year? No, you don't.
yeah,
There are two versions. There's the odd numbered versions and the even numbered versions. If you're on 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, or any other odd number, you've got 18 months of support. If you're on an even number, you've got 3 years of support. So use the even number and then wait until that's about to go out of support. Do loads of effort to move over to the next even number, And by loads of effort, I mean you open a bunch of files, you change one number to another number, and you hit build, and it works,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
But the problem is that I'm dealing a lot with customers and clients who they also use Node, but they've never had to upgrade.
Yeah.
So, one of my clients is running an app with Node version 14, which isn't supported anymore and hasn't been supported for like 10 years or something. But because they've never had a need to upgrade, they haven't. But because now they're seeing it from .NET as well, so they've
Hmm.
got maybe a .NET powered web server that is serving an app that runs Node in the browser. They're having to upgrade both sides, and it's really upsetting them because they're like, we need to build more features. We can't be building the infrastructure, and getting folks to slow down to speed up is difficult, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's fascinating. I think one of the things that I took from that is
Mhm,
like sometimes this goes back to our question or conversation we are having about risk, right? Some customers see like velocity as a risk, right?
mhm,
And it's funny because we live in this world where it's like agile software, ship software as much as possible, do all the things. But some companies are still like, I don't know. Like I don't want to consume this tool that changes every year. Like
mhm,
or whatever. I think all of that is pretty fascinating. And I think, one of the ways that I'd like to kind of wrap up this conversation is we talked about,
mhm.
your love of technology, your love of all these things, and then like kind of your love of .NET. So like what led you to like I want to be a content creator. I want to have a show where I talk about the technology that I like cuz as somebody who has similar spiciness, like I have my reasons. I'd love to know like what your reason is.
Yeah, so mine goes all the way back to university. So what I was doing at university was I wanted to get better at writing, right? Because when you're at university, you got loads of papers to write and dissertations to do, and I was like, I suck at this, right? And this was like I said, it's the early 2000s. The tooling wasn't really there to help you with that, right?
Mhm.
Like these days, I won't recommend it, but you can go, hey, ChatGPT, write me a paper on this, right?
Yeah.
And it will produce it. It won't be any good, but it will produce it, right? Or you can say to it, use it as like a pair programmer. Hey, ChatGPT, I have to write a paper on this subject. Help me to get started. What kind of formatting do I need, and what kind of structure do I need? Right? There wasn't any of that. So I got into writing content. So I started a blog and just started writing every week. I would write some random tip that I found either in my programming experience, or maybe I found a tool that folks could use. I got into like converting video from one format to another for a little while because I was like, well, how do video containers work?
Yeah.
So I wrote a whole tutorial on like how do I convert an AVI over to MKV using MP4 and AAC and all that kind of stuff. So for folks who don't know about that, that's one video format over to another, and then explaining how that all worked. And like I did that for 4 or 5 years. And then I heard that .NET was going cross-platform, and I had just written an article on my then brand new MacBook Air about creating a WinForms app and actually getting it working with GTK Sharp. So
Sure.
getting a WinForms app working on Mac OS, and I was like, this is amazing. There are lots of steps involved, and it's kind of finicky, and sometimes it doesn't build for no reason whatsoever. But look, I could do this thing. And then 2 weeks later, Microsoft were like, hey, so .NET V Next it's going cross-platform. I was like, how what? Because I
Yeah.
didn't have a Windows machine at home, right?
Excuse me? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right. And at that time, I didn't have a Windows machine. I had a Linux desktop and I had a Mac OS laptop. Just because I was like, well, I use Windows every day. I want to learn about it's that thing, right? That curiosity. I want to
Mhm.
learn, why does Linux exist and why does Mac OS exist and what's different about them. So I went through that whole process, and then I started writing about what was at the time named .NET VNext and then became .NET Core,
Yeah.
and I did that for a couple of years, I think 2016 through to 2018. And what I realized was I'm staying up until 2 o'clock in the morning trying to figure out whether this should be a period or a colon or a semicolon or a comma I can't figure it out. And so I was like, you know what? I'm not brilliant at speaking, but I could probably speak my idea into the microphone way quicker and edit it way quicker than I can with than versus writing it out. And then at the same time, I then started trying out like live coding. I was like, oh, cool, this Twitch thing. Actually, it was before Twitch. It was Mixer, right? And I was like, Mixer, cool. This is awesome. I could do this thing. I could be writing code, and people can watch it online, post it to YouTube, and it's brilliant. And then yeah, and then I kind of let that leave that by the wayside and got into this podcasting thing because I was like, well, I have ideas, I have thoughts. Other people in the industry have ideas and thoughts. Let's get people together and just start sharing these thoughts. And that's how I wouldn't have met you if I hadn't have done
Sure,
that,
sure,
right?
yeah, yeah.
And I wouldn't be an MVP if I hadn't have done that. So, like for me, that feels like I've grown as a person. I'm still not great at speaking, as anyone who is listening to this knows. I'm still falling over my words. I'm still using and like and and instead of just pausing and thinking about what I should say and then saying it.
Sure.
Um, and then immediately saying but it's exciting to me to be able to talk like we're doing now, to be able to talk about what is going on in the industry and how's it working, and then get to know people who've been in the industry for forever and people who've been in the industry for 5 minutes and notice that they have the same opinions and ideas, and that like the whole thing is entirely cyclical. Like Docker and containers is BSD jails from 1970, just like
Fair.
with web. Like that's all it is, right? All.
Yeah, I mean, it, like all that is fascinating. I think that I I talked a little bit about why I do this show before we got started, but like it
Mhm.
I just feel like I have just a need to talk to people that have the same passions as me, right? Like,
Yeah.
to go back to your conversation about you're in a computer lab and you found your people, right? Like, I'm
Mhm.
constantly looking for my people, like, and this is an opportunity to have an uninterrupted conversation for an hour with somebody that I typically wouldn't get the opportunity to do so, right? And I think that there's something really joyous in that because let's face it, we don't really have very many one-on-one conversations anymore in society, right? Especially
Mhm.
uninterrupted for an hour, right? Like it's always you're in a meeting or you're maybe having a little conversation with your partner and then a kid comes in and yells at you or life gets in the way or whatever, right? So like the gift that we have of being able to talk for an hour or whatever duration that we've specified uninterrupted is really a gift. And with that, like it
Mhm.
like, I know that time is valuable for everybody. So the fact that you're able to give your time to me is something that I really cherish. And it's like
Mhm.
it's something that I don't know how to put like words to it. It just makes me so happy that like people have given their time to me and also like have enjoyed the conversation. Because I mean, I don't do this for money. I do this for me and selfishly, like I said, just getting to chat with folks that I really
Mhm.
enjoy chatting with, like you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for that.
Yeah,
Also, but what I really like about doing podcasts, it's like and my upbringing will definitely be different to everyone else's, but when you turn up to school, it's maybe high school or whatever, in the very very early years of high school, and you're talking to a completely random person, you've never met them before, and you say something like, oh, I heard this great song by Nirvana last night, or I saw this great TV show, and then immediately there's that, holy cow, you like that too? You get to do that every single day,
yeah,
right? And that is just amazing. And even if it's some technology you've never used, even if it's some language you've never used, even if it's some technology or language you don't like, you can still have that wonderful open constructive conversation with someone and go, no, but have you done this? Yeah, I've done that. That's cool.
yeah,
Oh, what about this? Yeah, I've done that as well. Oh my goodness, have you ever built one of these? Yeah, I've built one of those. And I absolutely love that when I can have that conversation like we're doing now, where it's just like, yeah, but did you think about this?
yep,
Oh, I thought about that,
yep,
but then what about this? Right? It's the yes and conversation, and especially like you said, if it's with your people who speak the same, not necessarily the same language, but the same sort of jargon as you,
Sure.
you've then instantly got that connection and you can be like, oh, cool. Yeah, this, that, and the other. That's why I used to love going to things like meetups and conferences because it's like you can strike up a conversation with literally
Yep.
anyone. And it's that same feeling, like I was saying earlier, on. You walk up to a random person and go, so C#'s pretty cool. What do you write?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
language do you write? Oh, I write this. Oh, cool. Well, have you done this? Oh, I've heard that this is how, in Go, it's concurrency and it's multi-threaded and all that kind of. How does all of that work? Oh, well, let me tell you. Oh, well, in .NET we do it this way. Oh, this is pretty cool. And then you like you just have that instant. You make friends like that. It's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, the need for community and the fact that, look, if you're passionate enough to talk with somebody for an hour about something, it's gonna be a good conversation. More than likely. We
100%.
might, like, you and I might disagree on 99% of the things that we talk about. But that 1%, it makes it worth it every time. That's my thought on
Hmm.
it, right? Um, and as we wrap up, like, I think that this conversation has been great. It's been great to, like, I've chatted with you a few times on your show. And it's always a pleasure to speak with you. But it's also great to, like, learn a little bit more about how you got started, some of the things that kind of molded the Jamie that we know today, Jamie the Progman Taylor.
Hmm.
Um, and and I appreciate all of this, and I think one of the things I would highly recommend for folks listening is that if you're not already listening to Jamie's show, you can find it. It's called the Modern.net Show. Like, you can just search and you'll
Hmm.
find it because it's everywhere. You can also, find him on social medias. There'll be some links to some of the places. The best place is probably Twitter, right? Is that still probably the best place for you? Yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah.
the artist formerly known as Twitter. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can find him at Podcaster J. So that's PodcasterJay. That's a good place. But there'll also be some links if that place isn't your place anymore. There'll be some other places. Um, but yes, as we wrap up, I would love to get we've been talking for an hour about just all sorts of different topics, all sorts of different things that have made you, like, love this area of the world that we call technology. And I would love for you to, if you had the opportunity to, or if you have the ability to summarize, how you feel about tech, and what feelings you get. I would love to hear them if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So firstly, technology has allowed me to literally travel the world.
Yep.
I've been to Japan twice. I've been over to Seattle. We've met in person, over on the Microsoft campus a couple of times. I've been to a whole bunch of different places on the planet just because I'm able to do this thing. I can make these transistors dance, right?
Yep.
You alluded to it earlier on. There's a thing that Terry Pratchett says where he says humans taught rocks to think by trapping lightning inside of them,
Yep.
right? And that's what I'm doing. I'm a lightning wrangler. Like,
Yeah.
how cool is that as
Yeah.
a
It's
title,
pretty cool. It's
right?
pretty cool.
So that's really cool. And then being able to walk up to a random person at any, I'm not an extroverted person, but being able to walk up to people and say, "Oh, cool, this is, I'm doing this and this is, oh right, yeah," and strike up that conversation, then end up, going for a coffee with them the next day because you've bonded over something,
Yep.
right? That and that's two people who would never have met had it not been for all of the different technologies that are involved with what we do. And then even down to like I'm sitting here and I'm typing away and then it's not working, then suddenly it's working. I get like a eureka moment, right? I get this buzz. It's the same buzz that I used to get when I worked as a teacher, helping someone understand some concept. As my friend Zach says, making knowledge happen to them. It's the
Mm-hmm.
same buzz. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh my goodness, I need to do that again. And then I'll go through 40 to 45 minutes of it's not working, it's not working, it's not working. There, bang, it's working. Oh my goodness. And then I can go to like a family member or a friend and go, check this out.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense to you, but I made this, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Nothing is better than showing somebody who knows nothing and doesn't care about the stupid little thing that we built.
Yep.
Nothing is better. Nothing is better. Nothing.
Yep.
Oh man, they're
Absolutely.
chef's kiss. Like, oh, thank you so much for just being on that same wavelength where it's like, I have a partner and she very much is like, cool. And that's it. and that's it.
That's exactly what happens with me. It's
Yeah,
like, yeah, well done. Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's like,
Brilliant.
do you want me to like go? Oh, that's so exciting! I have no idea. Cool. All right. Um, yeah, and I think that it also keeps you grounded, like that level of like,
Mhm,
oh, like this really doesn't matter to anybody except me and the people that are in this area
mhm.
of the world. Um,
Yeah.
but so again, Jamie, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. This has been a pleasure
No
getting to talk
worries.
with you for an hour, and I appreciate all the folks that tuned in live and the folks that are tuning in the future. Hello there, future. And before we sign off, my friend, do you have any parting words?
So yeah, I just want to thank you, Isaac, and say that I appreciate you for inviting me on the show and putting up with me for an hour,
Oh,
and thank
it's
everyone
a
else
gift.
for listening. Either if you're in Team Live or Team Catch Up, right?
Yep.
However you are listening, however you are consuming this, thank you for sticking with me and letting me tell you this story because it's just oh my goodness, it's just such a I'm getting a buzz from this,
Yep.
right? Just because we're
Yep.
just talking about stuff that I'm excited about. And I guess I'd love to echo your thoughts earlier on about empathy, right? I talk a lot to juniors and people who are getting into the industry about empathy, sympathy, and compassion, and how all three are super important, not just for the people around you, not just for the software that you're using, and not just for the computers you're using, right? Have empathy for the computer you're using, but for the users that are using your software. Because at the end of the day, they're paying your mortgage, they're paying for you to go get lunch, they're paying for you to go have a coffee, right? They are as important as you are, right? You are slightly more important, but from your own personal perspective, but in the wider scheme of things, they are as important as you are, right? And we're all important. We're just trying to get through this thing called life, to quote the Prince. So why not, right?
Oh, so good. Well, again, thank you, Jamie, for hanging out with me, and thank you, everybody, for listening to this. This has been Coffee and Open Source. My name is Isaac Levin. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.